Before a system collapses, it doesn't explode, it leaks. Not in one dramatic headline. More like a ceiling stain that spreads while everyone in the room pretends it's just humidity. You notice it when you're paying more, getting less, and being told you're crazy for asking why. And if you zoom out far enough, you can see the leak lines running across the whole country through money, culture, competence, and trust. I'm not here to sell you doom. I'm a patriot. Patriots don't narrate their own funeral, but patriots also don't lie to themselves. If your roof is leaking, you don't chant everything is fine until the drywall collapses. You find the source, you own the problem, and you fix it because your family lives under that roof. Here's the first thing to lock in. America is not short on talent, grit, or capability. We're short on disciplined leadership and institutional consequences. We have a country packed with builders, people who work 2 jobs, run small businesses, raise kids, volunteer, coach teams, show up early, stay late, and do the right thing even when nobody's watching. That part of America is still very real. The leak isn't the people. The leak is the system that's supposed to serve the people. And the reason this matters is simple. Systems shape behavior. When the system rewards competence, you get competence. When the system rewards accountability, you get accountability. When the system rewards narrative, you get narrative. When the system rewards excuses, you get, of course, excuses. For too long, the incentive structure in our politics has rewarded optics over outcomes, press conferences over performance, slogans over receipts, and moral posturing over measurable results. That's how you end up with world-class resources and pockets of dysfunction that feel like a bad joke you're forced to finance. Let's talk about what the leak actually feels like for normal Americans. It feels like working harder while getting pushed backward. It feels like being taxed in 6 directions: income, payroll, property sales, gas, fees, and still watching basic services degrade. It feels like inflation doing what inflation always does, punishing people who live on paychecks and rewarding people who can park money in assets. It feels like watching temporary government programs become permanent and emergency powers become normalized. It feels like watching standards drop in schools, drop in public safety, drop in basic professionalism, and then being told the real problem is your attitude. That feeling isn't imaginary. It's the lived experience of millions of households, and the danger is not that people feel it. The danger is what happens when people accept it as normal. Normalization is how decline becomes permanent. Because once decline becomes normal, you stop demanding repair and you start adapting. You start lowering your expectations. You start living around dysfunction. You start creating private workarounds, extra locks, cameras, don't go there after dark, backup plans for everything, and a quiet resignation that the system isn't coming to help you. That's a survival response. But it's also how free people slowly become a managed people. Here's where the Watchman lens matters. The United States isn't just a piece of geography. It's a covenant, an idea backed by a constitution that assumes government power must be limited, split, restrained, and watched because humans are not angels. The system was designed with friction on purpose. Checks and balances weren't a bug. They were a feature. The founders didn't trust the process. They built a process that didn't require blind trust. So when you hear people talk like accountability is red tape or like oversight is mean, you're watching the country drift away from its own blueprint. Oversight isn't cruelty. Oversight is protection. It's the guardrail that keeps public money from turning into somebody's private lifestyle. It's the barrier between public programs and organized fraud. It's the firewall between a republic and a machine. Now, if we're going to do a breakdown of the US like we did with other countries that I've done, Bulgaria, Britain, China, the rest, we have to be honest. America has the same vulnerabilities any large system has. Complexity creates blind spots. Bureaucracy creates distance from consequences. And distance from consequences creates boldness. The boldness to waste. The boldness to experiment with people's lives. The boldness to fail and then request a bigger budget, like that failure was proof you need more resources. But the US also has the same strengths it has always had. Huge land, huge resources, deep markets, an entrepreneurial culture, and the most powerful alliance network on earth when we actually act like we want to lead it. Those strengths don't run on autopilot. They're maintained, like anything worth keeping. So where are the biggest leak points? 4 areas. The first leak point, the money model. A nation can survive debates about policy. It can't survive a financial model built on permanent overspending with no real consequences. Every household understands this intuitively. If you spend more than you earned year after year, you eventually pay the bill, either through sacrifice, collapse, or someone else taking control of your life. Nations aren't magically exempt from arithmetic. The bill still shows up. It just shows up differently. Higher interest costs, weaker purchasing power, less flexibility in crisis, and a constant need to manage the population with half measures and PR. So here's a hard fact layer without drowning you in a spreadsheet. The United States has run persistent deficits for decades, and interest costs have become one of the fastest growing categories in federal spending. When debt service starts eating the future, it's not left versus right. It's simple math. Here's the second leak point, competence. People will tolerate a lot if they believe the system is competent and basically fair. But when incompetence becomes routine, when agencies can't explain outcomes, when programs bleed improper payments, when procurement gets bloated, when obvious failures repeat, public trust starts to melt. Trust is the hidden currency of stability. Once it's gone, everything costs more. Security costs more. Enforcement costs more. Bureaucracy costs more. And community cohesion costs more. You can't buy trust back with another press conference. You only rebuild it by proving you can run a system like an adult. Here's the third leak point, clarity. We've built an information environment where speed matters more than truth and outrage matters more than accuracy. That makes the public easier to manipulate and harder to unite. In any real crisis, war, economic shock, natural disaster, the country needs shared reality. If the public can't agree on basic facts, the crisis multiplies. Confusion becomes a force multiplier for chaos. And a confused population is the easiest population to steer. Here's the fourth leak point, standards. A country is the sum of its standards. Standards is the home. Standards is the education. Standards is the leadership. It's the enforcement. It's the speech and honesty. When standards drop, predators flourish. Not just criminals, but predators in media, politics, corporate life, inside institutions. People who exploit loopholes, ambiguity, and weak consequences. Standards protect the honest. Weak standards reward the dishonest. Now, let me give props where props are due, because being honest means telling the truth in both directions. When leadership takes deterrence seriously, it projects strength abroad and treats sovereignty like a real thing. That matters. Peace isn't maintained by vibes. Peace is maintained by credible capability and clear lines. When America looks coherent and strong, fewer adversaries test us. When we look divided and reactive, more people do. That's not ideology. That's human nature and history. So yes, when the current administration does something that strengthens readiness, signals seriousness, or reduces the America is asleep vibe overseas, that is a net positive. But strength abroad cannot compensate for weakness at home. A nation that cannot enforce its own standards internally will eventually struggle to project them externally. You can't build durable power on a foundation of internal decay. That's why this conversation isn't politics. It's maintenance. It's the boring, unsexy work of keeping a republic functional. So here's the takeaway for what I just spoke about, and I want it to land very clean. America is not collapsing in one day. America is leaking in slow motion. The leak is not the people. It's an incentive structure that rewards narrative over competence and excuses over accountability. If we want a stable future, we have to stop treating dysfunction like the weather. We have to stop accepting this is just how it is now. Because once you accept it, you guarantee it. The good news is leaks can be repaired, but only if you tell the truth about where they're coming from, and only if you're willing to demand standards again, without apologizing for it. Here's the part that makes people mad. It's so simple it feels insulting. America isn't running out of money. America is running out of discipline. And when a nation loses discipline, the collapse doesn't look like one dramatic explosion. It looks like a slow leak that turns into a flood. One, how is this still happening? Moment after another, until the public finally realizes they've been living inside the consequences for years. That's where we are now. Because right now, the United States has 3 problems that feed each other like a self-licking ice cream cone. Number 1, we spend like we're immortal. Number 2, we borrow like there's no bill coming due. Number 3, we talk like the math is somebody else's problem. And that combination is how great countries start to wobble. Not because Americans stopped working, not because our people forgot how to build, but because our leadership class, both parties, different flavors, learned they can keep the machine running on debt, narrative, and vibes. And for a while, that works, until it doesn't. Because debt has a phase change. It's quiet, and then it's loud. It's manageable, and then it's why is interest eating the whole budget? It's we can kick this down the road, and then you look up and realize you've been sprinting toward a wall. That is the leak. The national leak most people can't name. The price of borrowing. You can argue taxes all day. You can argue programs. You can argue ideology. But you cannot argue with interest. Interest is what happens when you live on tomorrow. Long enough until tomorrow sends the invoice. And whether you love or hate the current administration, this part is structural. The debt is now so massive that small changes in rates become massive changes in national cost. That's not politics. That is simple math. Recent reporting tied to CBO analysts put US debt around nearly $37 trillion. And warns that new deficit increases also tack on additional interest costs, hundreds of billions more, just from the borrowing itself. Read that again. Interest on the interest starts becoming a storyline. That's when the leak turns into a flood. Because what do you get when interest grows? You get a government that starts paying more for the past than it can afford for the future. And once that sets in, everything becomes a Hunger Games budget fight. Defense versus domestic. Seniors versus young families. Infrastructure versus emergency spending. Borders versus school versus disaster response. It's not that those things aren't important. It's that you can't fund everything at once forever without breaking something underneath. But we're America. We can handle it. This is the part where the confident guy leans back and says, relax. We're the reserve currency. We're the biggest economy. We always figure it out. True. until the world starts pricing your confidence differently. And that's the difference between a strong nation and a fragile one. A strong nation treats confidence like a resource to protect. A fragile nation treats confidence like a birthright. America's strength is real. Our industrial capacity, our innovation, our military reach is very real. Our alliances still meaningful. And yes, when the current administration leans into deterrence and projecting strength abroad, that's a good instinct in a world that pushes weakness. But here's the trap. You can't project strength indefinitely if your internal systems are leaking credibility. Because credibility is the backbone of power. Not slogans, not marketing, credibility. And that brings us to the ugliest truth about the US right now. We are living in a country where the public has watched massive failures happen and then watched the system shrug. And shrugging is contagious. The real collapse pattern, consequences disappear. A society doesn't fall apart because it has problems. Every society has problems. A society starts to fail when consequences disappear, especially for people at the top. That's when the public learns a dangerous lesson. Rules are for regular people. If you run a small business and you lose track of money, it's not a press conference. It's a nightmare. It's audits, banks, regulators, and a possible criminal case. But when a government loses track, wastes, mismanages, or funds failure, it's complicated. It's unprecedented. It's we need more funding. It's you're being divisive for asking. That's how institutions rot, not from one villain, but from a culture that stops fearing accountability. And here's why it matters for your life. This isn't just about numbers on a screen. When the federal machine runs sloppy, citizens pay 4 ways. Taxes, these are obvious. Inflation, the silent tax that doesn't ask permission, it just keeps going up. Reduced services, you pay more and get less. Social trust collapses, which turns communities into defensive, exhausted, cynical places. And once trust collapses, you start seeing second-order effects that never show up in official speeches. People stop starting businesses. Families stop believing the future is stable. Good workers leave public services. Cops get handcuffed by politics. The best people disengage. The worst people organize. That's the national leak, the slow replacement of competence with narrative. So what's the point? Are we cooked? No, I don't believe so. But we are being warned. Here's the part I need you to hear. A nation can survive hardship. A nation can survive enemies. A nation can even survive bad leaders for a while. What a nation cannot survive is a permanent culture of no consequences. Because when consequences disappear, the system becomes a buffet for parasites, financial parasites, bureaucratic parasites, ideological parasites, and the working public becomes the fuel. That's when resentment rises. That's when polarization becomes a sport. That's when every issue becomes a civil war and nobody can even agree on what's real. And that's why the US breakdown isn't a one-topic episode. It's a pattern episode. Because the American crisis is not that we lack resources. It's that we keep letting the people who control the resources operate without fear of consequence. And when that becomes normal, the leak becomes a flood. America isn't collapsing like a movie scene. It's doing what great powers actually do when they start to slip. It's fraying at the seams, while everyone argues about which seam matters most. And here's the part that should sober up every adult in the room. Left, right, independent, doesn't matter. A nation can survive bad headlines. It cannot survive bad math for long. Right now, our math is loud. The US is sitting on roughly $38.56 trillion in total public debt. That's not a talking point. That is the Treasury's own number. And debt isn't just a future problem. Debt has a meter running in the present. Interest. CBO has been warning in plain English that net interest costs are on a steep upward trajectory and will become one of the fastest growing parts of the federal budget as debt remains high and interest rates normalize at higher levels than the post-2008 free money era. That means we're heading toward a world where a bigger and bigger chunk of your tax dollars doesn't build a bridge, doesn't train a cop, doesn't fund a school, doesn't harden a grid, doesn't secure a border, doesn't help a veteran. It just feeds the debt, like tossing steaks into a furnace and calling it dinner. And here's where the Watchman lens actually matters. Interest is the silent takeover. Because once a government's interest bill gets fat enough, it starts crowding out everything else. Then the politicians do what politicians always do when reality shows up uninvited. They panic, they posture, they print, and they blame. Now, I'll give credit where it's warranted. There are areas where America is still throwing haymakers. Energy is a big one. The U.S. has been operating at record level crude oil production. EIA data has consistently tracked record output levels and forecasts continuing strength, which matters for geopolitics, deterrence, and household costs. That's not just gas prices, that's leverage. That's supply chain power. That's the difference between America negotiating from strength or begging OPEC like a guy who forgot his wallet at the restaurant. And on crime, because everyone screams about crime like it's either Mad Max or Mayberry. Here's the reality. The FBI's national reporting has shown violent crime declining, with notable drops in homicide in the most recently reported year. That doesn't mean your neighborhood feels safe. It means nationally, the trend line is not as apocalypse coded as the internet wants it to be. So what's the problem? The problem is that we've created a country where we can still produce greatness, but we can't consistently govern like grown-ups. We've got world-class engineers and third-rate incentives. We've got brave men and women running toward danger while bureaucrats run toward cameras. We've got families trying to build stability while institutions experiment with instability like it's a hobby. And that's the real fracture. Not whether America has good people. We do. The fracture is whether the system above them still rewards competence or rewards the narrative. Because a republic can't run on vibes. A free country requires a few boring, unsexy disciplines that modern politics hate. You have to audit what you fund. You have to enforce laws predictably. You have to secure borders like borders actually matter. You have to treat debt like a threat, not like an accounting trick. You have to stop confusing compassion with permissiveness, because permissiveness always gets captured by predators. And let's talk about that last one, because it's where people get very emotional. Compassion is real. I'm not mocking compassion. I'm mocking the modern counterfeit version, where compassion means no standards. And the moment you ask for standards, someone calls you extreme. No. What's extreme is a government that can't stop spending, can't stop borrowing, and then acts shocked when the public starts losing trust. Trust is the currency under the currency. You can run deficits for a while. You cannot run a trust deficit forever. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth. A lot of what you're seeing isn't because America is uniquely evil or uniquely stupid. It's because we're living through the predictable late-stage symptoms set of any big system that's been running on autopilot. Complexity replacing clarity. Bureaucracy replacing responsibility. Slogans replacing results. Temporary measures becoming permanent programs. And every crisis becoming a reason to expand, never a reason to streamline. That doesn't mean the story ends in collapse. It means the story ends in a decision. Either we renormalize accountability, real accountability, measured and enforced, or we keep drifting until the correction isn't a vote, it's an event. And I'll say it plainly, if we want a strong America, we have to stop pretending strength is a costume you put on during election season. Strength is policy, enforcement, budgeting, competence, and consequences applied consistently. If we do that, this country doesn't just survive, it rebounds. because the raw material is still here. Productive people, unmatched geography, energy capacity, innovation, and the kind of spirit that doesn't die. It just gets insulted long enough to wake back up. Tell me this in the comments. What's the biggest leak you see in America right now? Debt, borders, crime, culture, or institutional corruption? Here's the part most people miss when they do the America is collapsing genre. America doesn't usually break from one catastrophic blow. America breaks when normal people stop believing the system will ever tell the truth, balance the books, or punish the people who loot the public trust. That is the leak we're talking about. And the only way you stop a leak is not by raising revenue. You stop it by tightening the joints. Accountability, enforcement, transparency, and consequences. Because right now, we're living in a country where the government can collect historic levels of money and still run a historic deficit. Then look you in the face like the problem is you didn't pay enough. No, the problem is that the machine learned it can spend first, explain later, and print the difference. And that brings us to the pressure point that will shape everything you feel in your daily life over the next decade. Debt plus interest. The US debt isn't just a scary number for political arguments. It's a permission slip for every future compromise. It forces bad choices. It makes leaders trade long-term stability for short-term optics. It turns governance into a juggling act with a gasoline can. The Treasury's own debt to the penny tracker is the clearest snapshot of what we've done. The total public debt outstanding is in the tens of trillions and continues to climb. And the cost of that matters most. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the cost that matters most isn't even the headline total. It's net interest. Once net interest becomes one of the biggest line items in the federal budget, you're not funding the future anymore. You're paying for the past. Translation is simple. You can win every political argument and still lose the country if you can't stop the math. So what does a serious reset look like without fantasy, without utopian, just cut everything, and without pretending we can tax our way into discipline? It looks like a return to grown-up governance, a state that can count, verify, enforce, and finish. Not big government or small government. Competent government. Constitutional government. And that's where I give credit where it's warranted again. People can argue policy all day, but projecting strength abroad and recentering deterrence is not optional. A country that's unserious about defense invites pressure everywhere. Arctic, Indo-Pacific, Middle East, cyber, all of it. The current administration has clearly leaned into a peace through strength posture, and that posture matters. But here's the problem. Strength abroad collapses if you're weak at home. You can't posture like a superpower while running your finances like a broke gambler who keeps asking for one more hand because this time it'll hit. Now zoom down from Washington to the ground level, because that's where people actually feel it. People feel collapse as friction. It's the insurance bill that jumps because risk is rising. It's the storefronts with bars and broken windows. It's the sense that law is optional for some people and enforced hard on others. It's the constant "we don't have money" speech while government somehow finds money for everything it wants. And here's another place we anchor in hard data. Recent FBI reporting and crime data releases have shown declines in certain violent crime measures and homicides in the most recent reporting periods. This is good news, and it proves something important. When enforcement focuses and community pressure align, the trend can actually move. But the reason people don't feel the improvement is because the culture signal has been chaos, inconsistency, revolving door incentives, selective enforcement, and a political class that talks about safety like it's a press release instead of a duty. So here's the Watchman level truth. A nation is not held together by vibes. A nation is held together by trust plus consequence. And when consequence disappears, the public instinctively knows even if they can't quote a statute or a budget line. That's why the real national repair strategy isn't a simple bill, or a single election, or a single personality. It's 3 blunt moves repeated relentlessly. Number 1, audit like you mean it. Not reports that gather dust. Audits that trigger prosecutions, firings, contract bans, clawbacks, and policy redesign. If public money can't be tracked, it shouldn't be spent. Period. Number 2, simplify systems criminals feed on. The more complex and fragmented a system is, the easier it is to loot. Complexity isn't compassion, it's cover. Number 3, restore equal application of the law. Not soft, not hard, equal, predictable, consistent. A country where citizens believe rules are real is a country that stabilizes. A country where rules are negotiable becomes a country where everyone plays defense. Now, let me land this with one more hard grounding reality that should humble every American, right and left. We're still a country that can produce. We're still a country that can build. We're still a country that can lead. Look at energy as one example. The U.S. has been at or near record levels of crude oil production in recent years, something that would have sounded insane decades ago. That doesn't mean every policy is perfect. It means the underlying American engine is still there. The question is whether 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The question is whether leadership at every level keeps trying to siphon that engine for political projects, or protects it so families can actually live, save, build, and breathe. Because here's what I believe as a constitutional conservative. The government's job is not to manage your life. The government's job is to protect your rights, secure the nation, enforce equal law, and stay inside of its lane. When it does that, America thrives. When it doesn't, people lose trust, and that's when the leak becomes a flood. If you want a story version of this exact theme, institutions cracking, consequences showing up, ordinary people navigating a system under stress, that's the heartbeat behind my thriller novel, Dead Reckoning. It's not a lecture, it's a narrative built around the kind of pressure we've been talking about. If this video gave you words for what you've been sensing, hit like so YouTube stops burying long-form analysis. Subscribe because the next breakdowns go deeper. Money, crime, borders, institution, and the real incentives driving all of it. And comment one issue you want exposed next. Debt, fraud, homelessness, spending, fentanyl, crime, or the hidden taxes nobody talks about. Stay sharp, stay grounded, and as always, continue to stand watch.